Welcome to the National Organization of Nurse Practitioner Faculties podcast.
Welcome to the second series of the NONPF podcast, created by the Simulation Committee of NONPF. This year, our podcast series, titled In the Trenches, Confessions and Pearls of NP Simulationists, will center around the 2023 fall release of the NONPF Guide to Nurse Practitioner Simulations, a step-by-step approach. This guide, an e-learning book, was created by the NONPF Simulation Committee. The e-book is formatted to help NP faculty design effective, measurable simulations that address learner programmatic and national level competencies. Led by members of the current Simulation Committee, podcast moderators invite authors of the ebook to share pearls of approaching simulation from the perspective of the nurse practitioner.
Hello, I'm Dr. Tedra Smith, a NONPF Simulation Committee member and an associate professor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham School of Nursing. I'm delighted to be your host today to discuss our NONPF Guide to Nurse Practitioner Simulation, a step-by-step approach. Today, we're going to be discussing Chapter 10, pilot testing. I am delighted to have with me today Dr. Carla Nye. She is a clinical professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, VCU. Her scholarship focuses on the use of simulation in graduate nurse practitioner education. Dr. Nye is an alumni of the NLN, National League for Nursing Simulation Leaders Program, an NLN certified nurse educator, a Society for Simulation in Healthcare certified healthcare simulation educator, and a member of the NONPF Simulation Committee. Welcome, Dr. Nye.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it, Tedra.
Thank you. Thank you again so much for being our guest today to talk about Chapter 10, pilot testing. To start our conversation, can you briefly introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a little bit more information about your background and expertise in simulation?
Oh, absolutely. So I, like many people, became in love with simulation. Well, for me, it was in the late 2000s when I was doing simulations with undergraduate students as a part of my role as a PEDS faculty member. And I was kind of blown away by the learning that occurred in the simulation area and how the learning sticked more than just lecturing and book reading and tests. And I really loved it when I saw in debriefing when the students would get it, when that light bulb would flash over their head. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. We should be doing this all the time. And at the time I had one sim that we did as a combination between undergraduate and grad, but my focus at the time was mostly undergraduate students. But I didn't realize how hungry the grad students were for simulations as well. So about 10 years ago, I came to VCU and I was the director of the Simulation Center. And it was really important for me to make sure that the graduate students got the same amount of attention as the undergraduate students did. And the graduate faculty got the same amount of attention in the Simulation Center that the undergraduates did. And so I wanted to really make it equitable across both levels, but I started to realize how limited the research, how limited the resources were for nurse practitioner simulations. It just wasn't the same as what we had in the undergraduate world. And that kind of started me on my scholarship trajectory. It's like, this is a wide open gap with not a lot of work. So I focused there. And I've been a member, like, as you said, of the NONPF Sim Committee since 2019. And we've been a really productive committee. Mm-hmm. We produced the standards of best practice. Now we have the ebook, podcasts. Who knew? We've been busy and have been doing a lot.
Yes, we've been very busy over the past couple of years, doing a lot of good work, though, especially for nurse practitioner graduate mm-hmm. education. And Carla, you've shared a wealth of information and you have a wealth of knowledge in regards to simulation, including focusing on pilot testing in regards to this chapter. Can you elaborate a little bit on what exactly is pilot testing in regards to the simulation? What does that exactly mean to pilot test your simulation?
Well, pilot testing is kind of what it says. It's almost like you're taking the simulation out for a test drive. before you send the simulation out to all of your students and all of your faculty. And I feel like this is such an important thing to do because you can have all the best intentions with your plans for the simulation and how it's all been put together. But until you actually see how it translates with the students, you're still not 100% sure that the simulation is exactly where it needs to be. I would say simulation is an art as well as a science. The art of simulation is creating that immersive experience where it feels somewhat real to the students and they're being challenged in their role as a nurse practitioner. But there's also the science of it, which is the pedagogy, how you arrange the situation. And there's evidence-based pedagogical support for simulation. There is the science of the setting up of the simulation and creating the environment within which they conduct the simulation. So you really have to think about all that. And often what happens is that, again, very good intentions and a very good plan. And then you come in and you do the simulation the first time, and it's the day of class where you're doing it for all of your students, and you get done and you're just like, oh my goodness, that did not turn out the way that I wanted it to.
Exactly. And we've been there before.
And that's what pilot testing can help you avoid.
Exactly. So you kind of hit on it a little bit, but why is pilot testing important?
I always go back to told the story so many times, but in an undergraduate simulation, we developed a simulation that came from the NLN ACEs cases. That was a same-sex couple. We just did not at that point in time have a sim that had we just didn't have a lot of DEI in its many variations in our simulation center. So we wanted to trial this, and we wanted to really make sure that we were all prepared for our students, and it was all about same-sex couples and working with them appropriately, and just tons of stuff in there about that. And we also included in the scenario, just to round out the scenario, we had the patient who was dying. His parent was not supportive of the same-sex couple. And so that was not the focus of the simulation. It was kind of an aside. It was a little bit to help the students kind of work through a challenging communication was really what we were trying to do. Well, we did the pilot testing and found out, of course, that our students had no issue whatsoever with the same-sex couples. They were quite comfortable with that, but they really had an issue with a parent who was not supportive and didn't know how to manage that situation. So here we thought we were doing A, and really in the pilot testing, we realized that B was the actual issue. So we really had to rethink how we were doing the simulation, what the preparatory materials were. I mean, and if we hadn't done the pilot testing, we would not have known that. And debriefing would have been a lot harder.
Yeah, yes. So excellent point about different perspectives. Things that we as faculty may think are important, or maybe something that students are already beyond, just based on generational things and different things that they've encountered in their life experiences that we may not be familiar with. So that is an excellent reason why we should do pilot testing, among many others, just to make sure we have everything we need. And also to make sure we're actually testing our objectives. And so I know in the area where I work and attending various conferences, faculty always have questions about what exactly should I do in a pilot testing? Should I run through the full simulation? Do I include students, not include students? Can you talk through the logistical kind of operational concepts to consider if someone's going to be conducting a pilot test, especially for nurse practitioner students?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you. Yeah, you want to do the pilot testing when you feel like the simulation, like it's on paper right now, all of your plans are on paper, when you feel like it's that you're kind of at the done stage. And you want to run a pilot test very similar to if it was an actual delivering the simulation to students, meaning you do the pre-briefing. If there's pre-work that needs to get done, it goes to the students beforehand. You do the pre-briefing, you run the sim just like you would run it, the length of time that you've got planned to run it. Like, is the time length even appropriate for the sim? That's a lot of the questions the pilot testing can bring out. So many things. Is there, you have the simulated patient who's had the training materials for a while and is ready and has gone through whatever training that you guys do for your simulated patients. The faculty knows what you're looking for, is for the debriefing. And then you also have the logistics people who are there, the operations team, because they're looking at it from the perspective of, did we have everything that's available? Is everything where it should be? So you need all of those levels of expertise who are there. And then you need the student's perspective. I love that you said earlier about making sure the objectives are met, right? If you have these 3 objectives and the students get done and they're like, what? No, that will help you to revise and refine your simulation to make it more appropriate. So you do the sim just like it normally would. And then you want to do 2 debriefings. The first debriefing, I always recommend, and I'll talk about the students in a second. I realized I didn't talk about that earlier. You run whatever your normal debriefing is. If your school is a DML debriefing, do DML. If your school is a Pearls, do Pearls. If they're a gas, do gas. Whatever the format is, run that simulation with the students, because that's part of the pilot testing, is to see how that goes. And then you do a second debriefing with the entire team. So the simulated patient is in there, the faculty is in there, the operations team is in there, the students are in there, and you're really going through and talking about the simulation itself. So did we meet the objectives? Could you achieve the goals we had set out for you? Was there enough information available for you to be able to perform the simulation in the pre-brief or the prep work, whatever it is? Did you have enough time to complete the activities? Were the cues clear enough to navigate your decision making? Sometimes we leave out vital things that help the students to kind of either know which direction to go, or if it's a more complex sim and you want it to be somewhat vague, right? Did we give you too much information, right? In terms of what we're testing. But a lot of times what we'll do is we'll run through it the first time, the sim, we'll do the 2 debriefings, and then we'll literally in that moment say, okay, let's change this, let's do this. And if it seems like there's a lot of changes that need to be made, we always plan to run through it one more time. And so if we had 2 students, if the first student was the active member and the other was the observer the first time, we'll have them flip roles. Because at this point in time, it's not as much about the learning that they're getting at it from the sim, but they're actually participants in improving and advocating for a better simulation.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. You mentioned doing 2 debriefs. So is it your opinion, your recommendation that you include students in this actual pilot testing and debrief those students, and then also debrief faculty? Can you talk more about what that looks like?
Well, I'm a big fan of this for 2 different perspectives. But first, let me tell you about the students that we recruit to do this, because that will put it into perspective for our listeners. Is we either get students who are, their course is going to be doing this simulation in their program coming up. And if they participate, they actually get credit for that simulation. They don't have to come back and do it later when the rest of their peers are doing it. Or we look for student volunteers who have already completed it and are just willing to come back and be part of it. There's a lot of students who feel like they learn every time they do it. And so they will raise their hand and be willing to come back and do another simulation. So a lot of times you can do a pilot testing with just 2 students. It doesn't have to be a lot. It's just a couple. And I am a huge fan of having the students part of the debriefing, because I am always about teaching students to be active members in their learning and advocating for themselves, and plus learning the process. This is how we get our fingers into students about how fun it is to do educational, to be to be a faculty member, and they start to look at what happens behind the scenes. And I think it gives them a whole new perspective of what we're doing. So anyway, I love having students involved.
Good. Excellent. And I love that you shared that example of how you could use some students that are actually in the course, or some students that have had it before, because they have a different perspective, different opinion that could help us make the simulation better for the next group of students. So thank you so much for sharing that example. And we've come down to the end of our time. And I want to know, is there any final thoughts, any final takeaways you would like to leave with our audience today?
Well, I think the big thing is pilot testing is a series of steps that you do. And we kind of went over the basics, but the ebook has the chapter has more detailed information about doing it, kind of a step-by-step guide, which was definitely our goal as we were writing this book. But I think we all have this intent that we really want to deliver quality education. Right. And sometimes we're not really sure what we're doing and we're hoping that we do it right. But we do have resources that can help. And that's kind of what this book is about. But the intent is normally really, really good. And so we just want to be able to support people who are trying to do the best level work. And if you go through and you pilot test and you kind of get some of the kinks out before you deliver it to students, it makes you feel better that you're not having to correct mistakes later on, and you've had that chance. But I think that's the real power of the pilot testing, is you go into your simulations as a faculty member much more confident about the quality of the simulation and that you're delivering what you want to deliver.
Thank you. Excellent way to close. Remembering we have the basic assumption, which is why we wrote the NONPF Guide to Nurse Practitioner Simulations, a step-by-step approach, because we have that basic assumption that all NP faculty want to do their best. And so this is a resource for you to implement simulation in your area. So thank you so much again, Dr. Nye, for being here with us today. And remember that you can find this resource on the NONPF website.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for joining us today to hear from our NONPF simulation experts. This podcast has been written, directed, and produced by David House, Jenny O'Rourke, Elaine Kauschinger, Tedra Smith, Jeannie Rodriguez, Leanne Barfield, and Queen Henry-Okafor. Special thanks to NONPF CEO, Mary Beth Bigley. The digital ebook is available for purchase on the NONPF website to both members and non-members. The opinions expressed in this podcast series or any product mentioned are not specifically endorsed by NONPF.